ready then? And the timer? The affirmative team. And Justin, please. All right, on again. In this last negative speech, I'm going to be wrapping up the round from the negative team's perspective and showing you once and for all that the affirmative team's plan is a bad idea and we should not enact it in today's round, but should stay with the status quo. So let's go over my voting issues in today's round, the negative team's voting issues. Now the voting issue one is of the disadvantages. And Rachel responded to both the disadvantages with 6 responses in her last speech. We'll be going through each of them one by one. Her first response to that is a tiny tax. And our response to this is that the value destruction is based on the revenue. The piece of evidence stated that if they generate $150 billion per year, that this will destroy $1 trillion worth of revenue. So this is based on how much revenue they gain from these transactions and how much they will hurt the value. So they hurt the value by $1 trillion, and we should prevent that in today's round. Her second response is that there are no numbers for how much transaction costs will be raised. My response to this is that the transaction cost raised will be enough to hurt the value. The piece of evidence said the transaction costs will hurt the value, and knowing that this will hurt the value of the assets is enough quantification. Now, their third response is that we have no definition of efficiency. My response is that the definition of efficiency is basically making the market work better. So they hurt efficiency, meaning that they make the market work worse. So they make the market work worse. They hurt efficiency. Now the fourth response is that 1980s is that we didn't have any of this in 1980s and the market was good. My response to this is again Justin's response. The market was different in the 1980s. The market is different now, so we shouldn't be looking back in the 1980s to see what we should do in 2012. Her fifth response is that no evidence of liquidity decreased to a bad amount. My response to this is a 50%. 50%. High frequency trading is 50% of trading and 50% of market value. They supply a lot of liquidity to the market. By completely eliminating 50% of the market, this means we are completely eliminating 50% of the liquidity in the market. This is a very huge quantification by the negative team. Her sixth response is that this is a tiny tax that won't be passed down to investors and consumers. My response to this is of the cycle. Investors are going to be hurt by this tax. As I've read evidence for my 2NC, several pieces of evidence. So what they're going to do is they're going to pass this down as lower wages, higher prices, and laying people off. This will hurt consumption, and by hurting consumption, GDP drops. By dropping GDP, revenue drops. So once we go in fact to the impacts of this disadvantage, the impacts were GDP drops, revenue drops, and the market is distorted and the efficiency is hurt. Let's go to voting issue 2, which is of empirics. Now Rachel brought up empirics in her last speech from the UK. My response to this is 5 to 1. 5 to 1. Justin brought up 5 empirics of countries that have had an FTT in his first speech, saying that these countries were not successful with their FTT. Rachel and the affirmative team has brought up 1 empiric about how it was successful. So we should trust the 5 empirics over the 1 empiric. Now a few more points under this voting issue. My point 1 was about 5 to 1. My second response is that they didn't address the solvency point of evasion in their last speech specifically. The piece of evidence that they read didn't actually say that there was no evasion in the UK with that tax. So they basically accept that there will be evasion under their plan because they dropped solvency point 1 of evasion and migration. And my third point under this is that they dropped solvency point 2, that trading is unmonitored. So they accept that some trading will be unmonitored under their plan. This proves that evasion will happen because some of the trading won't be monitored, and so some of the revenue won't be gained. So they won't tax some of the items. So let's go to voting issue 3, which is of the fiscal crisis. Now Rachel responded to this in her last speech, saying that the debt is worse than taxes. My response to this is that taxes will make the fiscal crisis worse. And my partner read evidence for this in the YC, saying that if we make more taxes, this will actually make the fiscal crisis worse. Now my second point under this is that there will be no fiscal crisis. But if the affirmative team does implement that, if you do implement this tax, these taxes will make it worse. So I would ask you to disregard the affirmative team's plan because if there was a fiscal crisis coming up, they would make the fiscal crisis a lot worse. And so they go against one of their advantages. They will actually not solve the fiscal crisis, they will make it worse instead of solving it. And they can't solve the fiscal crisis anyways because as we proved for the voting issue, through the disadvantages and the solvency points, they won't actually gain any revenue with their plan because of evasion, and the market will shrink and GDP will decline, and all these factors go into less revenue. And my voting issue 4 is of investors hurt. My first point of this is that price errors. There are less price errors from HFT. This means that this helps other investors in the market because they know how to get prices and pricing discovery. So this helps long-term investors. HFT actually helps long-term investors, as my partner said in his first speech. My second point is that of transaction costs. transaction costs. HFT reduces transaction costs, and my partner also said in his first speech, and this also helps long-term investors. But what the Affirmative team does is they raise transaction costs, and this will in turn hurt investors. So for all these reasons, Judge, let's look at the impacts. They decline revenue, they decline GDP and the market. They really hurt the market. It is detrimental to the market and the economy. So for all these reasons, I would ask for you to vote for the negative team and stick with the status quo. Thank you.